The sun burned like never before in that forgotten corner of Arizona, where the cracked earth seemed to forgive no one. Every step was a challenge. Every breath of wind brought more sand than relief. And in the midst of this piercing silence, a lone horse cut through the desert like an arrow without a destination. On its back was Sheriff Ethan Cole, a man with a face hardened by time and eyes as cold as steel. He didn't speak more than necessary, and now he was in pursuit. A young woman had escaped from the makeshift prison in the town of Dry Hollow. No one knew exactly who she was. She had appeared out of nowhere, dressed as a boy, injured, scared. They said she had stolen food, attacked a merchant. But when the sheriff first saw her, something in her eyes froze him for a second. It was fear, an old, deep-seated fear, like someone who has been on the run for a long time. Even so, the law was the law. And Ethan set out alone, without calling for backup, determined to bring her back. Her tracks snaked through rocks and cacti like the footprints of a wounded animal. She knew the desert, knew how to hide, used shadows as allies. But Ethan was persistent, not because he liked hunting, but because he needed to understand who she was. Something in his chest, buried for decades, was beginning to stir. He tried to ignore it. After all, he had lost too many people to trust strangers. But the way she ran, it seemed too familiar. Each night brought back memories from the time when he was just Eddie, a skinny kid with a dog named Buck, living in a small town that time had erased from the map. Memories that he buried along with the name of his sister, who disappeared when he was only 9 years old. No one ever knew what happened. His mother cried until she had no more tears, and his father, well, his father was never the same. Ethan became a man early, trading memories for distance, until he forgot, or thought he had forgotten. Now, there in the desert, following a girl no one knew, he felt a chill in his chest that didn't come from the wind. Every step toward her was a step inside himself, and that scared him more than any armed gunman, because ghosts from the past aren't fought with guns, they're fought with the soul. And then, in the distance, he saw it, a figure running toward the rocks. She was still close, and he still had time. She ran like someone fleeing from something much bigger than a sheriff. Her bare feet were already bruised by the rocks, her face marked by dust and despair. I knew I couldn't take much more, but I also knew that going back was impossible. She couldn't, not after what she had seen, what she had learned, what she had hidden for so many years. Her name was Clara, but she hadn't used that name in a long time. The world knew her by other names: slut, thief, trouble. But no one had ever looked into her eyes and seen what she really was. A survivor. Ever since she was little, she had learned that trust was a luxury. She had lived in houses that weren't hers, in hands that didn't care. She had run away so many times that she couldn't even remember the number. But in that makeshift cell in Dry Hollow, something different happened. The man who looked into her eyes had something she recognized. It wasn't kindness. It was pain. Pain that was like her own. That was why she had run away, because he could see too much, and she couldn't truly be seen. Not now. Clara slept among bushes, ate roots, drank from shallow puddles, but none of this was new. The desert was cruel, but the city was worse. She preferred the harsh silence of the wind to the sound of doors closing behind her. And at night, when the sky was brighter than anywhere else in the world, she allowed herself to remember. Of a time when her name was Lara, of a brother who made her laugh, of a mother who combed her hair. But these memories came and went like mirages, beautiful, distant, and impossible to reach. On the third night of her escape, Clara felt that he was close, very close. She could smell the horse, the sound of his hooves on the rocks. There was nowhere left to run. She hid behind a large rock, trying not to breathe. And then she heard his footsteps, heavy, constant, determined. Desperation tightened her chest, but along with the fear came something else, a certainty. She already knew that sound, that way of walking, that weight. As Ethan passed within a few feet of where she was hiding, Clara closed her eyes and whispered, "Eddie," almost soundlessly, almost breathlessly. But he stopped, the footsteps stopped, and the silence of the desert screamed louder than any human voice. And there, under the pale moon and open sky, everything began to fall apart. The name hung in the air like a soundless thunderclap. Ethan turned slowly, his eyes scanning the shadows between the rocks. "Who said that?" he murmured, his hand unconsciously touching his empty holster. But it wasn't fear of danger. It was fear of the truth. He knew that name, Eddie. Hardly anyone called him that. In fact, no one had in decades. It was a name buried in the ashes of the home he'd lost when he still believed life was fair. And now, that name was calling to him from the middle of the desert. Clara emerged from behind the rock like a ghost. She was trembling, exhausted but steady in her eyes. Her disheveled hair swayed in the dry wind, and her parted lips said more than words. "Eddie," she repeated, now with more certainty. Ethan stared at her for a long time, as if trying to recognize a face among the mists of the past. And then, something in him gave way. A muscle in his face, a tremor in his hand. "Lara," he whispered, as if he was afraid to break the spell. She just nodded. The world stopped. The desert ceased to exist. There were only those two. He, now a grown man, seeing the girl who disappeared one night without explanation. She, now a wounded woman, recognizing in the sheriff's face the features of the brother she thought had died. They didn't run to each other. There was no hug, just silence again, but a different silence. A silence of recognition. Like when the soul understands something before the body reacts. They were there, brothers, alive, together, and broken. Ethan sat down slowly on a rock, breathing heavily. His hands were shaking like never before. "You disappeared," he said, almost in a whisper. Clara sat on the ground, legs crossed, her eyes never leaving his. "I was taken." 3 words, but each one was a stone on his heart. The past, which he had tried so hard to erase, now came back with a name, a face, and pain. And all of it hit him cruelly. "I looked for you, for years. Then I gave up. I thought you were dead." She looked at him. "A lot of things died, but not me." The tears came slowly, as they always do when the body is too tired to fight. And that night, under a starry sky that had witnessed tragedy and miracle, 2 brothers met again, not as they were, but as life had shaped them. And for the first time, Ethan felt something different inside him, something like hope or forgiveness, maybe both. The fire crackled between them, casting shadows that danced like memories across the rocks. Ethan slowly stirred the embers, his gaze fixed on the fire, trying to find some kind of meaning in it. Clara remained silent, hugging her knees, her eyes lost in the flames. The night was cold, but the distance between them was what was most chilling. After all, time had created walls, and now words had to do the work of demolishing each one of them, brick by brick. "Do you remember the tree behind the house?" he asked, trying to recall a faint memory. Clara nodded. "We used to climb to the highest branch and think we could touch the sky." Ethan smiled for the first time. "You always said you'd run away there when you got mad at Mom." She smiled too. "I tried. The day they took me, I ran to the tree, but they were already waiting for me." The sentence fell like a stone on Ethan's chest. He didn't know that. He never knew. She told him in painful detail how she was taken in by a man who claimed to be a relative, how she was moved from house to house, how she learned to lie about her name, her age, her story, how she survived, how she died inside over and over again. Ethan listened without interrupting, his face tense, his soul in pieces. "I blamed our parents. I thought they gave me away." He shook his head, his eyes full. "Mom died soon after, of grief. Dad, he became a different man." The conversation lasted through the night, until the words ran out, and all that was left was the sound of the wind. But it was a different sound, lighter, as if the desert itself accepted this silent reconciliation. Ethan took the canteen and handed it to her. "You don't have to run away anymore." Clara looked at him, her eyes watering. "And you don't have to hunt ghosts alone." Those sentences hung between them like unspoken promises. That night, they slept close to each other but not touching. There was still a long way to go between them, but the first step had already been taken, and in both their hearts, for the first time, there was room for something new, reconstruction. And in the middle of the desert, between sand and scars, a seed of new beginnings sprouted. At dawn, Clara pointed to the horizon, to a rock formation familiar to everyone in the region, Fort Delilah, an old, abandoned military outpost, now nothing but ruins and echoes. "That's where he took me first," she said quietly. Ethan looked in the same direction. "Do you want to go back there?" Clara nodded. "I want to face the place where my life was broken. That's the only way I can understand who I am now." Ethan hesitated but agreed. He knew that sometimes, to move forward, you had to go back to exactly where it all began. The journey to the fort took almost the entire day. The sun was beating down, but Clara walked with firm steps, guided by a strength that came not from her body but from her soul. Ethan walked beside her, quiet, attentive. The silence between them was different now, not heavy, but respectful. It was the silence of those who know that some pains can only be faced without distractions. When they reached the place, the wind blew stronger, stirring up dust and memories. The walls still standing seemed to watch them like ancient witnesses. Clara entered first, stepping over the fallen beams, past the scars on the walls. "He left me here the first night. I was only 9. Ethan swallowed hard. Her words cut like a razor. She touched the walls with her fingers, as if trying to scrape away the memories etched into the wood. "I stayed here for 3 days, before being taken to another house, and then another, and then another, each one colder." Ethan followed her with tears in his eyes, feeling a helplessness that hurt more than any physical wound. "But I came back, Eddie, not as a victim, as someone who survived." Clara stood in front of a broken window, where the sun streamed in golden beams. "This place doesn't define me anymore. It just reminded me of how hard I fought." Ethan walked over, put his hand on her shoulder. "You're stronger than any sheriff I've ever known." She smiled, her eyes red. "And you're more of a brother than I thought I deserved." They stood there for minutes, staring out the window at the sky, like when they were kids, looking at the stars in their backyard. Before they left, Clara picked up a rock from the ground. "To remind me that I came back, and I left of my own free will." Ethan nodded. "Memory can hurt, but it can also set you free." And with firm steps, the two of them left the old fort behind, but not the story that they would take with them, scarred but alive. And the desert once again seemed to respect the silence of those who struggle to live. On the way back, Ethan knew there were still questions he needed to ask, but each word had to be spoken carefully. Clara was opening doors that had been locked for years. Forcing them would be like breaking an old mirror. All you saw were fragments. "Clara, why didn't you ever try to come back?" She was silent for a few steps. Then she answered quietly, "Because I thought no one was looking for me, that you followed, that I was better off forgotten." That sentence went through Ethan like an arrow. We never stopped. Dad scrounged for every last penny, until he drowned himself in alcohol. I became a sheriff, trying to find justice for someone. I just didn't know that someone was still you. Clara looked at him. There was pain there, but also surprise. "You became the law," she said, almost with sad irony. "And a fugitive. Fate has a strange taste, doesn't it?" Ethan smiled sadly. "Fate has ironies that not even God can explain, but we're here, and that's what matters now." They stopped to rest in the shade of a solitary tree. Ethan took something out of his pocket, wrapped in an old handkerchief. It was a small silver chain, a star-shaped pendant. "Do you remember this?" Clara put her hand to her mouth. It was the necklace she had worn as a child, the last gift from her mother. "I thought I had lost it, Ethan held out his hand. "I kept it all these years. It was the only thing I had left of you." Clara took it with trembling hands, and the tears came unabashedly. For the first time, she was crying not because of pain, but because of reunion. The moment was silent, but it screamed inside them both. What they were living was not just forgiveness, it was reconstruction, an attempt to sew together the loose pieces of time. And there, under that forgotten tree, the two made a pact, not of blood, but of soul. "We will never run away again, Clara. Not from the past, not from each other." She nodded, holding the necklace against her chest. "Never again." And the desert, which had so often witnessed escapes, was now the scene of a reunion that time had almost erased. Night fell over the desert with an almost poetic slowness, painting the sky purple, orange, and a blue so dark it seemed to drag the stars closer to the earth. Clara and Ethan set up camp at the foot of a hill, far enough from the road to be unseen, but close enough to the memories that still haunted them. The fire crackled low, illuminating only their faces, which now resembled each other more than ever. There was something in their eyes. It wasn't just blood, it was shared history. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt like he could breathe again, without the invisible weight he'd carried in his chest since the night his sister disappeared. As they roasted a dry piece of meat over the flames, Clara spoke slowly, as if she were sewing words together so as not to hurt herself with them. "I remembered you in pieces, like burned photos, where all you can see is an eye, a piece of a smile. But now, seeing you like this, whole, I feel whole too." Ethan didn't answer right away. He just looked at her with a tenderness he didn't know he had. "I promised myself that I would never lose anyone in my family again. And when I stopped looking for you, I thought I had broken that promise. But today, I think it was just on pause." Clara smiled with tears in her eyes. "We were just waiting for the right time to come back." And then, to the sound of the wind and the crackling of burning wood, Ethan told her things he had never told anyone. He told her how, after she disappeared, he spent entire nights without sleeping, waiting to hear the creak of the door. How he had learned to be tough because he thought pain was punishment, and how his job as sheriff helped him pretend he was useful, when in reality he was just trying to escape the guilt. Clara listened to him with her eyes wide open, an old pain resurfacing, not because it still hurt the same way, but because there was finally room for it to be welcomed. And that changed everything. At that moment, under the starriest sky they had ever seen together, Ethan took the necklace he had given her earlier, now hanging around Clara's neck, and held it for a few seconds. "We were just kids, and even then, I swore I would always protect you. I couldn't, but if you let me, I can keep that promise now." Clara held his hand over the necklace and replied, "You didn't fail, Eddie. Life was just cruel, but you found me, and now we are together." The silence that followed was not one of pain. It was one of healing. It was as if the entire desert had stopped to listen to that ancient promise being renewed. Two brothers, a wounded past, a promise rediscovered, and the certainty that despite everything, it was still possible to rebuild. There was still time. The next morning's sun rose timidly, hidden behind high clouds, as if the sky itself sensed that this was an unusual day. Clara woke up before her brother, sat on the edge of the camp, and stared at the horizon, where the desert seemed to stretch to the end of the world. For the first time in years, she didn't think about running away. There was no route planned, no worry about footprints or traces. There was only peace, a peace that is frightening at first, like when a prisoner realizes that the cell is open, but is still afraid to leave. Ethan woke up soon after and, seeing her there silent, just walked over and sat next to her. What happened that day was something no one in town would ever forget. They rode back to Dry Hollow, riding together side by side without fear, without haste. The people saw them and fell silent. The looks on their faces were first of surprise, then of respect, because there was something in their eyes that you didn't see every day. Reconciliation. The sheriff didn't come back with a fugitive. He came back with his sister, and there was something so powerful in that scene that even the hardest hearts were moved. It was as if the desert itself had stopped to let that reunion be seen by all. At the police station, Ethan gathered the few documents that had been issued in the name of the girl they had arrested days ago. Clara doesn't exist on paper. And do you know what that means? Clara nodded. It means I can be whoever I want to be now. And that was exactly what they did. At the town clerk's office, with the help of an old judge who was a family friend, Clara was given her birth name again, Lara McBride. Ethan signed as a witness, his hand shaking. When the paper was stamped, he whispered, "Welcome back." But her return wasn't just for the city, it was for herself. In the weeks that followed, Lara settled into a small house near Ethan's ranch. She learned to plant crops and care for animals, and little by little, the scars of her past began to take root in her present. The city's children began to see her as a kind of living legend, and the adults, they simply respected her. Because anyone who braves the desert and comes back in one piece deserves more than respect. They deserve a place. Ethan, on the other hand, was never the same sheriff again. He was still serious, firm, but there was a new glow about him. Maybe it was hope, maybe it was just peace. Whatever it was visible. And when anyone asked about his sister, he would just say, "She went and came back, and now no one can get her out of here anymore." The desert, which had so often hidden pain and silence, now had a different story to tell. And it began with two brothers, a reunion, and the day the world stopped to hear a childhood name. The days that followed Lara's return were like a late spring blooming in the heart of the desert. Each morning brought with it the smell of fresh coffee coming from her new house, and the soft sound of a life that was slowly ceasing to be about running away. She tended the garden, planted herbs and lavender, and became a regular presence at the small town's fairs. People who had previously been suspicious now stopped to listen to her. She didn't tell her whole story, but when she spoke, it was as if time stood still around her, because Lara didn't speak with her mouth. She spoke with her eyes, the eyes of someone who had lost, survived, and chosen not to hate. Ethan watched this with discreet admiration. Every time he saw his sister smile at a child or teach a neighbor how to make tea, something inside him warmed. The serious sheriff, who for years believed that his destiny was only to do justice, now understood that the greatest justice he could offer was to welcome people. He began to be seen differently by the town as well, as a man, as a brother, as someone capable of change. And even without saying it out loud, everyone could see it. That reunion had healed more than just two souls. It had healed an entire part of that community. One night, sitting on her porch, they talked about the future. "Do you still feel like you're running away?" he asked, looking up at the star-filled sky. Lara sighed. "No, now I feel like I'm walking." Ethan nodded with a slight smile. "Me too." And it was there on that worn wooden bench that they both realized freedom isn't about running without being caught. Freedom is being able to stay, to put down roots, and to trust that the world is no longer an enemy. The bonds between them, once frayed by time and silence, were now firm, made of spoken words, small gestures, forgiveness. Ethan began to think about laying down his badge soon. "I think my time as sheriff is coming to an end. I want to take care of other things now. Farming, maybe." Lara laughed. Who would have thought? The boy who played police in the backyard now wants to be a farmer. And Ethan replied calmly, "Maybe what we were as children will always know how to save us." They both knew there were still scars, but they also knew they didn't need to hide them anymore, because now they told a story of overcoming. And together, they decided that the past wouldn't be a burden. It would be a foundation, something on which they could build whatever came next, without rushing, without guilt, and with a lot of love. And in that freedom that does not scream but transforms, two wounded hearts finally found peace. It was a calm morning, with the wind carrying the scent of flowers from Lara's garden, when Ethan left his badge on the City Hall table. No one argued. No one tried to stop him. There was a serenity on his face that brooked no opposition. "The city is already in good hands. Now it's my turn to live," he said. He took his hat, shook his successor's hand, and left without looking back. Not out of coldness, but because he knew that what really mattered was just ahead. Waiting on the porch of a house that smelled of freshly baked bread, Lara was there, as always, sitting on the wooden bench, a book on her lap, the same star necklace hanging over her chest. When she saw her brother approaching, she just smiled. She wouldn't ask anything. She knew. Ethan sat down next to her, took an apple from the bowl, and began to peel it with his usual knife. They were silent for a while, sharing the sound of the birds, the warmth of the sun, and the tranquility of a moment that, years ago, would have seemed impossible. And then he spoke. "I think I found what I've always been looking for." She looked at him. "And what was it?" Ethan smiled. "You." But there was more. In the small town, a small orphanage was struggling to survive. An old building, few hands to care for so many children, and it was Lara who had the idea. "Why don't we help? Maybe those children are where we were, and maybe we can do for them what no one did for us." Ethan agreed without hesitation. They started little by little, donations, renovations, reading afternoons, classes about the land, and soon the place became a real home. A home full of laughter, wooden floors, the smell of cake, and hope. The story of the McBride brothers became a local legend. It was told by word of mouth, over cups of coffee and on park benches. They said that the sheriff who hunted outlaws found his sister missing in the desert, and that together they turned pain into shelter. It was no exaggeration, it was true, because where there had been flight, there was now permanence. Where there had been fear, there was now trust. And where there had been only law, there was now also love. And so, under the open sky of Arizona, among sand, roots, and memories, two brothers wrote a story that neither time nor wind could erase. The story of two hearts that met again, not to forget the past, but to make it the fertile soil of a new future. And so, amid the dust of the desert and the tenderness of reunions, two brothers stopped being lost pages of an interrupted story and became authors of a new chapter, written not in haste, but with truth. Ethan and Lara proved that life does not end when we fall apart, but when we give up trying to rebuild ourselves. And they did not give up, even when they were hurt, even when they were discredited, even when they carried scars that time could not erase. They chose to come back, they chose to stay, they chose to love. There is no law more powerful than the one that arises within the heart. The one that forces us to seek out who we were, to forgive who we stopped being, and to welcome who we find again in the mirror. Ethan gave up his badge, not out of weakness, but out of wisdom, because he understood that a man's greatest duty is not to enforce worldly justice, but to restore justice within his own soul. And Lara, who once ran barefoot to escape her fear, now plants firm roots in a soil where before there was only pain. They did not return to the past. They transformed the past into the foundation for a new home. If this story touched some forgotten part of you, then don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that there is still time. Time to go back, to ask for forgiveness, to reach out, to build a new chance, even if the whole world has already given up. Subscribe to this channel to continue hearing stories like this one. Stories that don't sugarcoat pain, but that show how much it can transform us. Send this video to someone on WhatsApp, in your family group, to that friend who's drifted apart, or to someone you miss. Sometimes a video can be the bridge to a reunion. And before you leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from. I really want to know where this story reached, whose hearts it touched. Every word you leave will be read with respect, gratitude, and the certainty that, even though we're far apart, we're connected by the same emotions. Thank you very much for staying until the end. May this story stay with you, like Lara and Ethan's steps on the desert sand, light, firm, and forever remembered. Until next time.